So the election season is upon us again, a time when people hold frustrating dinner table debates and arguments about their choice of candidates, and persuasion fatigue sets in, clouding judgments and exasperating many. But in this world of political over-exuberance and under-exuberance, there are some voices of reason and realism. The Nigerian Economic Summit Group, or NESG, the respected think tank which has been holding its much-attended summit in Abuja, is one of them. And amongst its ranks is the good governance advocate, economic entrepreneur and founder of Stanbic IBTC Bank and ANAP Foundation, Atedo Peterside. For the last year or so, his focus has been on getting as many young people as possible to register to vote. And now, in the campaign season, he and the NESG have been setting realistic priorities for the presidential candidates. But being realistic for Mr. Peterside doesn't mean being pessimistic. Speaking at the NESG summit in Abuja, he gave at least one reason to be optimistic as the 2023 elections approach. In a world enveloped by a balloon of cynicism, despair, and often undesirable outcomes such as poverty.
What gives me hope, actually, it will surprise you. You know, historically, we had presidential elections coming, and with due respect, many people got up and made all kinds of obviously false promises that were put on the economic side, defied all logic. What gives me hope today is that all the major presidential candidates, each of them is addressing issues like an unaffordable petrol subsidy. So it means that we had to sink so low that common sense has finally prevailed across the board, and that gives me hope.
Atedo Peterside. Well, for more, I'm joined now in the studio by the man himself, the investment banker, Atedo Peterside, CON, president and founder of ANAP Foundation, and founder of Stanbic IBTC Bank. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time. This is a busy period for you to come in and share your thoughts with us, but a rather lone note of optimism struck by you there in that clip we just saw. Is there much more optimism that you find on the horizon as the elections approach?
I think the second reason for optimism is something that you touched. You know, at the end of the day, the people get the quality of the government that they deserve. They get the leaders that they deserve. And so part of the problem was that we sunk so low that by the time of the Anambra election, last year, voter turnout was 10%. Many of the youth didn't even bother. They didn't even come out. They had given up on the country. And that was the mood nationwide. So many of us thought that was a dangerous situation, because at the end of the day, they are the ones that should be demanding better governance. And the only way they can achieve that is to take part in the electoral process. So that was the reason for this whole campaign, which all kinds of various groups got involved. You know, it's like an idea whose time has come, people buy into it. And most of the youth now responded and went to register. And I think the Australian election was a good example. Voter turnout was 43%. That's high. And hopefully the coming elections, if we believe our opinion polls, people are telling us, 8 out of 10 are telling us this particular election they are going to vote. I think it's a combination of reasons, including sometimes when things get so bad, you decide, okay, I'm going to get up now and exercise my civic duty. Perhaps if things were good, they wouldn't bother, some of them.
Well, that is true, because you find very low voter turnouts in things like elections in the UK, for example. Very few people turn out because, I mean, broadly speaking, institutions are working and are continuing. So does that mean then that your ANAP Foundation, which contributed so much to registering, helping to register young voters, will now turn the focus as the elections approach to actually getting them out there to vote? Because that's key, isn't it? Yeah,
okay, that's under Go Nigeria. So ANAP Foundation was the initiator of the idea of Go Nigeria. And so it was under Go Nigeria. Yes, if the first part of the campaign was people should go and register, the second part is already taking place on social media, go and pick up their PVCs. But I should add a word of caution. Not all the PVCs are ready. So we try and track. We have a team trying to track when they are ready, the PVCs in batches. So INEC will tell you those who registered after January or PVCs are not yet ready. If people don't know, they will go out at the wrong time and get frustrated. But it's important that we all stay vigilant, because one of the easiest ways to influence the outcome of elections is to deliberately disenfranchise large numbers of people. And we can't afford to allow it to happen. And we won't allow it to happen. We have to find means of escalating all those complaints and getting people out there. INEC has to stand up and do all the things they promised. And so far, let's believe them. INEC themselves were involved in the campaign to get youth to come out and register and all that. You cannot turn around and disappoint them.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you were talking at that NESG summit about the high level of poverty in Nigeria. You suggested that for Nigeria to progress, the issues of multiple exchange rates, fuel subsidy, which we heard you talking about, must be addressed urgently. Are you holding out hope?
And oil theft.
Yes, and oil theft.
These are the avenues through which our commonwealth gets taken away from us by a handful of people.
Absolutely. Are you holding out hope that the current government will do so, or is it now all up to the next government?
You know, with due respect, even at that clip you played, that video clip, and the basis for optimism, what you didn't play was the question. At the end, the moderator asked us, looking ahead, is there any basis for optimism? So I was talking about 2023, really, saying that if these major presidential candidates are beginning to, one by one, say the right things, because it was not always so. I don't want to go into the past and name past candidates just to embarrass them, but it was not always so. With due respect, we had people out there, major candidates, talking on the economy, talking around nonsense, and they got elected. What happens, of course, is that the country, the populace gets better educated time and time again. So I think around each major candidate, their teams and so on have told them, look, the time for coming out to disgrace yourself are over. If you're not careful, there's so many educated voters now across the country that you may get punished. So people are being forced to improve their act in terms of the messaging and what they are promising. We've also had cases where candidates or third parties in the political party made promises on behalf of candidates. The candidate wins the election later on and denies all knowledge. So so therefore, bringing out a manifesto is the easy part, or bringing out a pact, or these are my plans. You've got to interrogate the guy, the candidate himself, about the plans. Because, hey, we don't want a competition among consultants who wrote the best looking plan. The only way to know it's real is to question the candidates about those plans. That's when you even discover whether the candidate even knows what's in the plan or not.
Yeah, that's a good point. And obviously this time you're looking ahead, to a new government, and presumably you or members of your team have had a chance to look at the manifestos that have been made available of the presidential candidates. The NESG, of which you're a part, has also set priorities for the presidential candidates. Do you think they quite get it about how to deal with all the issues that have been raised?
You see, I think it's important to deal with the big issues. So in some countries, there's a national consensus on some big issues. Take the UK. All the parties accept NHS, National Health Service. Indeed, they all compete on how they're going to, in their plan, how they're going to improve the National Health Service. Nobody comes to say he wants to tear down National Health Service. So on those three big issues I mentioned, oil theft, is anybody going to come out and tell us that he will not take oil theft seriously? Let him come out and tell us. You talk about the unaffordable petrol subsidy. If you look at next year's budget, federal government revenue, let's say it's 7 trillion. The oil subsidy is 7 trillion. So effectively, all our revenue is going on one single item. It's unsustainable.
Yeah.
And then
ridiculous, basically.
And then the third one is the exchange rate. So the point I'm making is that there's a basis for optimism that those big issues, we can get some form of consensus. For me, if we got all the major presidential candidates to sign up on how to correct those three major distortions which this government ran away from, that would be phenomenal progress for Nigeria. Let me tell you what the problem was historically. One person gets elected, the opposition starts talking nonsense and embarrassing him and making him run away from doing the tough things that are required on the economic side to improve the lives of the country in the long term. So what happens is that the opposition starts raising questions and lying and deceiving people. So the person in charge panders to the opposition. So if we get all the major candidates to sign up to the correct thing for those big elephants in the room, then because they signed up to it, you cannot do a U-turn just because you lost and say, oh, this guy shouldn't address oil theft, or this guy, unless you're an oil thief yourself, of course.
Yeah, that's a good point. And given what you've just said, what is your assessment of the political lay of the land at the moment?
That's a broad question.
Well, you could narrow it down to your perception of the candidates.
Or I'll focus on what is new.
Yeah.
What is different about this election? We've already touched one of them. This looks like an election where the turnout, all things being equal, will be higher than normal. There's a high level of interest. There are reasons for that. The previous election, with due respect, many people had no confidence even in the electoral process. People felt that it doesn't matter how many votes were cast. INEC would announce Buhari as winner. Are they right? Are they wrong? We can argue until we are blue in the face. The fact remains they announced him as a winner. So people did not trust INEC and the system enough to believe that there could be a regime change. This time round, there has to be a regime change. Come May 29th, President Buhari is leaving. So the hope is that people think if they take an interest and they come out in large numbers, they will influence who gets to replace President Buhari. So naturally, there's more interest at the end of a presidential tenure than halfway through a tenure when you don't trust those in power.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, one of your pet projects, as you continue your advocacy for good governance in this country, is the fact that you've worked very hard to bring young people into the political space. Clearly you see them as the agents of change, but you're not writing off the old, are you? Because
of course not.
They have to, it's got to be a kind of transitional thing,
but let's be careful. The demography is pretty obvious in Nigeria. It is skewed heavily in favor of the young ones. People in my generation, I'm talking about those who are 65 and above, we are less than 5% of the population. So whether you like it or not, 95% of Nigerians are below 65. So, and you follow those demographics all the way down. This is a country of young people. And that's another dynamic that is going to have an impact in the elections. Some of these young people are making choices simply because they're tired of the same old people, the same old faces. All those dynamics are at play. So it's not just, there's some things driving voter turnout, including some people looking for new names, new faces. They want hope from somewhere. And it's difficult to put all your hope in people who have been around forever and have never solved the problem. It doesn't matter whether they were there personally or not. They came out of an establishment or a political party that has had all the time in the world to improve Nigeria. So those are among the things driving new forces. And that's why all of a sudden, the presidential race in the broadest terms sounds like a 4-horse race. Some people narrow it down to a 3-horse race, but hey, there are 4 horses out there. Also, there's plenty of time. We still have 100 days, which is a long time in politics.
And talking about the horses, 4 or 3 by different counts, one of the ways that people are attempting to assess these things is through polling and through the surveys that are conducted, one of which is done by your ANAP Foundation. You've already done one. What is the next step as far as that is concerned? No.
We've done the first poll, presidential poll. And when it says done by ANAP Foundation, it's commissioned by ANAP Foundation, executed by NOI Polls.
Right, which is a well-known international
which is the top polling agency in Nigeria. more importantly also, look, NOI polls will do a poll for you. If you come and say, I'm Charles Anyagolu, help me measure this, they'll measure it for you. What ANAP Foundation has done is that through the years, because we began this since 2011, we have fine-tuned what are the most important things to measure. So even the questionnaire, what they're asking people, all that stuff has been structured. So we have a template. And touch wood, every single poll we've done before, the result is available on our website. And as of today, everybody that was identified as being in front and the poll turned out to be the winner. But this time is a bit different. It's a bit different partly because the length of time between the primary and the election is much longer than before. So things can change. So what we are doing is doing a series of polls. But in the past, we did a series of polls also, let's say in 2015, 2019. But because the time was so short, those series were done, in quick succession. So it didn't really tell you a lot. It just showed you who had momentum. But now the gap is wider. So between our first poll and our second, it's at least 6 to 8 weeks. And then we still have another 6 to 8 weeks. Now you can tell me, hey, in the next 8 weeks, the country is going to change. It can happen. The other thing also is that when you do polls very early, you have a larger percentage of people telling you that they're undecided. And they're just being honest. They've not put their mind yet. You're coming to them in September, asking them about an election in February for presidency, March for governorship. The guy's telling me, hey, I'm looking for 3 meals a day. I have school fees to pay. Come back to me in March about the election, the elections that concern governorship. By then, I would have put my mind to it. So the undecided block is high. And it keeps coming down as we get nearer to election day. Then there are also a smaller group of people who refuse to tell you who they are going to vote for. And my experience through the years is that those people who refuse, they generally tend to be afraid of something or somebody, and it's usually those who are currently in power. So if those who are refusing to disclose are very large, it's a worrying sign for those in power. If you're intimidating people, threatening them, you can bully them, then if the guy intends to vote against you, he will refuse to disclose, just for his own protection. So meanwhile, the candidates who have absolutely no threat.
So you're presuming that that person is going to go vote for you when they clearly might be going in another direction?
No, I'm just saying that generally the guy is refusing because he's worried that you're a bully and doesn't want to give you an opportunity to know his intention. He's afraid of the pollster, that it may leak that he actually said he's going to vote against the establishment. So he wants to keep it to himself and wait until election day, go in there and cast his votes and come out.
But of course, you're not just doing polling on the presidential level.
Yes.
You're also doing it on the governorship.
We also did governorship, and we released the results for 5 states. Was it last week or the last 10 days?
And I was curious in that particular governorship poll because it's an assumption, I suppose, that one tends to think that certain trends would manifest themselves in particular ways. If you take, for example, Lagos, you've got the governor of Lagos, Sanwo-Olu, polling very differently than what Tinubu appears to be doing in the southwest. What is can you explain a bit of that?
Yeah, okay, the numbers don't lie, so we're trying to find out what are the numbers telling us. Sanwo-Olu's lead in Lagos from our poll is much larger than the poll that Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu has in the southwest. Now, some people will tell you immediately that it's obvious, there are reasons for that. And you tell them, what's the reason? They'll tell you, well, first of all, he's a younger man, isn't he? And if we're talking about youth demography, perhaps the fact that it's a much younger person, there's less aversion to him than for the much older person. Second one, possibly again, perhaps he's carrying less baggage in terms of if you're a younger person, how many things have you done wrong in your short life? An older person has had a chance to do all sorts of things. People like you, Charles, have had plenty of time to do all sorts of things. He's probably carrying less baggage. A third possibility is that he comes out of a political arrangement where he does not carry 100% of the blame for everything that goes wrong. People see him and think, well, the young man is trying. Perhaps he could have done more, but he has this people around him who is not completely free of. So they don't blame him 100%. But when your presidency, the buck stops on your table, you are the big gun. So you can't tell people stories. And there's also an element of the fact that at the federal level, all the figures are there for poverty, unemployment, all the hardship indices. Somebody has to be blamed for that by voters. People say incumbency is an advantage. Incumbency becomes a disadvantage when people are suffering because they blame the people who have been in power. So it's also possible that although Tinubu is not the president, people see him as APC and say, look, I've been unemployed throughout the time of APC at the federal level, so you are to blame. But all those factors might, but even then, please, let's get it very straight. Our polls showed that Tinubu was ahead in the Southwest. The fundamental difference is that Peter Obi was running a very good second to Tinubu in the Southwest. In Sanwo-Olu, the second reason why there's a wider gap, he's doing better than Tinubu is doing, from his Lagos result. But the second person behind Sanwo-Olu, it's a long way back. Also partly because there's a fragmented race behind him. So it is 2 or 3 people struggling to be his opponent and dividing the anti-Sanwo-Olu vote. In the case of Bola Tinubu in the Southwest, our polls showed his challenger largely in the Southwest was Peter Obi. Atiku was much further back as third.
But does that depend, some would argue, and probably people in Tinubu's camp will probably argue, on the methodology that you use, such as the demographic that you actually survey, the people that you talk to, and so on?
Let me explain that. We have been using this same methodology right from the beginning. We only modified it slightly. Number one, ANAP Foundation never did online polls. We never used an app because if you use those instruments, they're biased in favor of the person who has the more educated voter. So we've always used methods that made it possible for even the most uneducated person in the most remote parts of Nigeria may also get sampled. So we used the mobile phone. Many years ago, we also used field workers. The problem with field workers today is that it's dangerous to send them into some parts of the country. You don't want to go and lose somebody else's child in an opinion poll. So we use mobile phone. And mobile phone penetration in Nigeria is actually quite good today in the rural areas. So you can actually pick up the phone and call into Boko Haram territory, parts of it. You can call rural parts of bandit territory.
And those people actually answer their phones.
They answer their phone, but then you won't want to physically go there. And if you're responsible, you won't want to send another person's child to go in there for an opinion poll. So the mobile phone gives you better penetration. So that what we are doing, and also the random sampling technique must be good, because that's important, because if it is distorted and only picks some kinds of people, then it's a biased poll. So the methodology that NOI polls has developed, the random sampling techniques, have turned out to be very reliable, and that's why almost all our past polls have finished up being in the right direction vis-a-vis the ultimate election result. But please remember that polls are devoid of intimidation. They're devoid of vote buying. They're devoid of rigging. So on election day, all those factors come in a little bit, and we hope that INEC will stand up and do the correct thing and work very well to minimize the incidence of all that.
Right. So when's your next presidential candidate poll?
You want me to let the cat out of the bag? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I thought you'd have an idea.
We have it in the works, but when it's ready, we'll bring out the results.
Right. 2023, of course, obviously, as you said, a moment of great hope, perhaps even a historic moment if we can avoid the pitfalls. What are the things that you think could go wrong?
With the elections? Well, many things. Violence is already happening. People are complaining at this rally. A is accusing B of bringing thugs. Earlier on, I mentioned there could be deliberate attempts to disenfranchise large segments of the population. That can be done in a variety of ways. And that in a governorship election, in a presidential election, you know where you're strong, you know where you're weak. If the authorities allow you to disrupt voting in the areas where you are weak, you know, shooting and unknown gunmen, all sorts of things, it can affect the outcome, especially if it's just intimidation. I mean, I'm from Rivers State. We've had elections in the past where sometimes on the day of the election, you hear gunshots all over the place, everybody runs away. When the place is running away, then a few people come back and they voted, and people start arguing, well, the election took place. It took place, but half the people ran away. So the turnout is low because of intimidation. So, but these are all threats, you know, and ultimately, also with the level of insecurity, I think everybody's worried that there may be parts of the country where on election day, even INEC may face some serious challenges. So I really hope that the authorities are living up to it. And it's the one major positive legacy that President Buhari can leave behind. He's already given us a better electoral act, and if he can just ensure that the authorities, everybody is online to do the correct thing. If all he delivers for us on his way out is a reasonably clean election, that we have confidence in the result, then we would say, okay, thank you very much. That's the most important single thing that we could have done probably in the circumstances.
I want to thank you very much indeed, Mr. Peterside. I know you've got things to do and you have to run, so thank you so much for giving us the time. And Atedo Peterside is a CON. He's, of course, an investment banker, president and founder of ANAP Foundation and founder of Stanbic IBTC Bank. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Charles.